Hello everyone and welcome to another weekly recap video. In this video we're going to be looking at the class tuning changes coming to live on the next reset. We'll look at the blue posts and break down all the changes that you can expect for your favorite classes. We're also going to be checking in on the felcycle puzzle progress and see how far they've come along on that, and what you need to do to get caught up to where they're at so you can unlock them out when all 12 secrets are discovered. So we're going to talk about the class tuning now. I'm not going to go over every change. We're only going to hit on the high points on a few things because there's some big impactful stuff that was done this week that should change some classes for better or worse. The first thing off the note is Blood Death Knights. The tuning updates done to Deathbringer hero talent tree at the beginning of the patch have notably affected Blood's output more than Frost's. The damage effects of the Keystone and Capstone talents are being increased to make Deathbringer a more competitive choice again. So for Blood Death Knights, Deathbringer's Reaper's Mark and initial and stacking damage is being increased by 25%. And Exterminate and Wave of Souls is being increased by 25% as well. So earlier in the patch, they nerfed this. It hurt Blood Death Knights far more than it hurt Frost, so they're just trying to put the power back into it so Blood Death Knights feel more comfortable using Deathbringer in high key situations and high raid situations. For Frost, we are looking at a nerf to Breath of Syndragosa because they would like for their single target to be more on par with that AoE damage, so they are buffing Obliterate and Frost Strike. Druids is getting a buff to Swiftmen healing. Ferals are getting some buffs to their abilities, and some of their Druid of the Claw, Strike of the Heart crit chance and damage is being shared between Feral and Guardian for buffs, getting a 5% increase on that. Survival Hunters are getting a nerf to Merciless Blow and Pack Leader Vicious Hunt. Our first big change on things is for mages. Now, for fire mages, you're going to want to sit down and rejoice because you are getting some buffs, and you're getting some really nice quality of life changes to the Frostfire hero talent. So for Frostfire, and this is going to work for both Frost and Fire because they want it to feel like a comfortable option for both specs. You're going to be getting a buff to your Fire Mastery, now grants 2% haste instead of 1%. Isothermic Core Comet Storm, I've messed that up like 3 times already. Effectiveness increased by 200% instead of 150. Frostfire Burst and Frostfire Infusion damage increased by 25% and 50% exclusively for each. Frostfire Excessive Frost cooldown reduction reduced by 10%, was up from 5. And then Ashen Feather, Phoenix Flame damage bonus increased by 50% up from 25. Pyroblast is getting an 8% damage increase, and Meteor's direct damage is being increased by 25%. Those last 3 are for fire single target. They want fire to feel stronger in a single target setup, and they want to really put it more so into Pyroblast and Meteor than to spread it across the entire kit. They want to kind of focus it on Pyroblast so that way that spell feels like it's keeping up with the rest of the kit. Those changes to Frostfire, of course, are going to be a part of the Frost Mages kit now as well. They can just spec into the Frostfire hero talent and try those things out. Windwalker is getting a buff to Celestial Conduit, so for folks who have thought about trying to use that and it just doesn't feel like it's matching up, some big buffs to Strength of the Black Ox, Flight of the Red Crane, and Courage of the White Tiger should give you some buffs there to maybe give that a shot and see if it pairs up with the other hero talent. Fist of Fury is getting a buff. Blackout Kick is getting a buff. Flurry of Zuin is getting a buff. Courageous Impulse is getting a damage boost to next Blackout Kick on the proc of 200%, was 125. Shadow Boxing Treads now increases the damage of your Blackout Kick by 20%, and it causes additional Blackout Kicks at 80% effectiveness, was 70. This is basically their way of making sure that the overall performance of the Windwalker doesn't lag behind, and giving them some build diversity by making Conduit of the Celestials a potential viable option, even if it's not the most powerful of the 2 options, still something more in line with the damage that they would like to see Windwalkers have. Paladins are getting a damage nerf across Lightsmith in 3 parts. They're getting the Divine Inspiration chance to proc an armament being decreased by 50% for proc specialization. Divine Guidance damage is being reduced by 20% for proc specialization, and Forge's Reckoning damage is being reduced by 15% for proc specialization, along with Refining Fire damage being reduced by 10%. So prop Paladins, this is going to feel kind of rough. I'm not sure what the idea is. They didn't really give any sort of insight into why this change was being made. I do know that prop Paladins did feel pretty strong in certain AoE situations. I'm not sure if that's what prompted this. But if you play a prop Paladin, let me know in the comments what you think the idea behind this was, other than just malice and spite. Priests are getting a buff to Holy Word, Serenity, and Sanctity. Rogues are getting a buff on the subtlety side for Deathstalker. So Deathstalker as a hero talent choice has not been the most ideal for subtlety. They would like to give you some option for using it as opposed to Trickster. So they're buffing Deathstalker plague damage effects increased by 45%, and they're giving you a black powder damage increase of 20%. Now, Shaman is getting a buff to the Farseer hero talent, a personal favorite of mine. Farseer Chain Lightning is getting a buff from your ancestors of 30%. Lava Burst damage from ancestors is getting buffed by 15%. Latent Wisdom now increases ancestor spell damage by 25%, was 20. Routine Communion now has an 8% chance to trigger instead of 5, and Maelstrom Supremacy now increases the damage of your Earth Shock, Elemental Blast, and Earthquake by 15%, was 8%. Along with Restoration getting the buff to Chain Lightning damage from ancestors and Lava Burst damage from ancestors of 30 and 15% each. The idea is they want you to think more so about Farseers than Totemic, and as a fan of Farseer, I'm all for it. I really like the idea of having the spectral apparitions pop out and help you damage in certain moments in the fight. It just feels like you have more going on as an elemental shaman. And for restoration for that matter, but really the elemental shaman aspect of, oh look, these two ghosts popped out, boom, lava burst. I like it. I think it's fun, and I'm glad to see they're giving it some damage so that way it's more appealing than Totemic. At least to me, it feels like it's going to be more appealing to Totemic. Enhancement Shamans, however, are getting just a straight nerf. There is no flowery language hiding this at all. Developers' notes even say, we're reducing the power of Maelstrom weapon spenders for enhancement to lower their overall damage output. So 8% damage reduction on all Maelstrom weapon spenders. This does not affect PvP combat, but for me, for PvE only, I don't care. I just leveled an Enhancement Shaman. I don't know how bad this is going to hurt. I am going to test this after I'm done recording this video. Get out there, see how this feels. My Enhancement Shaman isn't overly geared as it is, and I was still peeling about 400 to 500k, and I felt like that was high considering what my gear level was. I'm pretty sure this is going to put me back down into a level of med reality, I guess would be the way to phrase it. And then lastly but not least, in the PvE side of things, to round things out, Warriors are getting a buff to Colossus Warriors. They want them to feel more innately tanky without needing an active mitigation playstyle. So for Prot and Arms, you're getting a buff to the damage reduction in Mountain of Muscle and Scars and Dominance of the Colossus. So you're going to feel passively tankier, and they would like that to be more of an option sometimes than just having to worry about active mitigation, for your Prot Warriors especially. But Arms is getting this as a byproduct because they share that tree, so Arms Warriors should feel more durable in most scenarios. PvP has a few things going on as well. Blood and Unholy. Blood is getting a nerf to the Death Strike damage. Unholy is getting a buff to Festering Wound damage and Fester Might effectiveness. Demon Hunters, because their damage has been low outside of their cooldowns, they're getting a buff to Immolation Aura, Demon's Bite, Demon Blades, and Fell Blade. Druids is getting a healing buff to Symbiotic Blooms from the Wildstalker hero talent. Marksmanship is also getting a buff to help their single target come up. Dark Ranger Black Arrow is getting a damage increase of 12%, and Aim Shot and Rapid Fire each getting a 15% increase in PvP combat to their damage. Arcane Mages are getting a slight redistribution of how their damage is going to come out. So instead of it being all burst windows, they want it to feel more consistent across your core abilities without having to rely so much on procs and talents. And they're also going to add more consistent damage coming from the Sun Fury hero talent. So for Sun Fury, and this is going to work for fire as well, Sun Fury is going to have Spellfire Spheres grant 2% increased spell damage in PvP combat up from 1. Lingering Embers now granting 2% spell damage in PvP combat up from 1. And all Arcane Phoenix damage increased by 20% in PvP combat. But Greater Pyroblast and Arcane Surge are not increased. So that is going to buff both Fire and Arcane. And beyond that, for Arcane Mages, Arcanosphere damage increased by 40%. Arcane Surge now deals 20% damage instead of 25%, so a slight tweak to the damage there. Arcane Missiles damage increased by 10% in PvP. Arcane Blast damage increased by 10%. Arcane Barrage increased by 15%. Arcane Bombardment, however, now increases barrage's damage by 20% instead of 40%, so they're not going to make you go overboard on your Arcane Barrages. Those are the changes for Mage. Arcane Mage should feel more consistent and smoother in PvP combat, which, having fought against many Arcane Mages at certain times in PvP, once they hit you with that big burst, if they didn't kill you, you do have the opportunity to just knock them out before they can reload. So this should be a way to help smooth out that window. For Monks, Windwalker is getting a nerf to their Dance of the Wind. The dodge chance increased by 2% per stack instead of 10. And this change moves Dance of the Wind below the base hit chance threshold even at max stacks. So that way, for other melee, you'll be able to smack on a Windwalker that's giving you a hard time. Paladins in the Retribution area, eye for an eye damage is being increased by 50% for PvP combat. Holy Priests are going to see a buff to Flash Heal, Heal, and Power Word Life healing in PvP combat, along with Priests getting a Mind Games damage and healing reversal increase of 40%. And for Shamans again, Elemental. Additional Elemental buffs and nerfs here. Additional Lava Burst for Primordial Wave now deal 25% of normal damage in PvP combat, was 50. Chain Lightning is getting a 10% damage increase in PvP, along with Lightning Bolt getting 10% in PvP. Earth Shock's getting nerfed by 15%. Lava Burst is getting buffed by 15%. Charge Conduit now increases the damage bonus of Lightning Rod by 50% in PvP combat, was 25, and Storm Elemental's haste bonus is now 50% more effective in PvP combat. Just to give shamans smoother damage, kind of like what they did with Arcane. They took a lot of the pop out of Earthshot, but they want you to have more smooth, effective damage in single target and AoE cleave. And then Restoration is getting a Lava Burst and Flame Shock damage increase of 30% for each spell, so that way you can contribute more when heavy situations of healing are not occurring. For Warlocks, Affliction is getting a buff to Hellcaller's Blackened Soul damage of 15%. Hellcaller Mark of Pertheran is now increasing the critical strike damage of your Wither by 25% in PvP combat, up from 10%. And Hellcaller Zevram's Resilience is now 6% more effective in PvP combat, and that change will also count for Destruction Warlocks. So Destruction and Affliction are getting a bit of a defense boost, I believe, in PvP, and then Warlocks are getting some damage on Affliction. And then lastly, but not least, to round out everything in the changes this week, for Fury Warriors, Mountain Thane Lightning Strike damage increased by 50% in combat. So I know we didn't sit down and talk about every change, but let me know in the comments what you think about your particular class and how you feel like they were buffed, nerfed, or for some classes just missed entirely, because we still don't see Evokers, and I didn't see Demon Hunters in PvE, or Warlocks for that matter. So let me know in the comments how you feel about that. I know tuning and everything has been kind of touchy so far in this expansion, and Blizzard has done what they can to make it right, and by making it right, sometimes they make it worse. And I feel like hero talents are at the end of that. But let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll see how this change affects everyone as it goes live. So moving on from the class tuning, there's not a whole lot going on retail right now. Of course, the Classic Anniversary server is alive, and folks are still working through Season of Discovery and Cataclysm Classic. So there's different varieties of WoW for you to enjoy over the holiday season, but if you are more retail-centric like myself, there are a few things going on. First one is the Pilgrim's Bounties, so the Thanksgiving-themed event is live again in Azeroth. If you're still trying to complete what a long, strange journey it's been, or just generally enjoy the holiday, that's live, so you can gather those rewards and enjoy the bounties harvest and everything that comes with it. Beyond that, however, there is a puzzle going on right now. So for you mount collectors or folks who just like doing puzzles in general, there is a puzzle being solved at this moment by the WoW Secrets Discord and just player base at large for Incognito, the Indecipherable Felcycle. And I have a picture of it here on the screen. But this thing is at the center of a 12-step puzzle, it looks like, that they have already completed 8 of the 12 steps on. I'll leave a link in the description for how to get caught up on what steps they've completed and maybe help them solve the next 3. But beyond that, it just looks like a reskin of the Mountain Dew giveaway bike, which for folks outside the States or folks who just won't buy soda and sugary snacks and stuff like that, here's an option for you to get that style of bike, and maybe not in red, but in green. So something to do until the next content patch comes out in December. And generally, these puzzles can be fun, although sometimes they can be absolutely maddening. If you did the, I forget the name of the mount, but the purple unicorn from a few years ago, you realize that some of these borderline on the insane in terms of what they ask you to do. But this should be a nice time sink for folks, and it will keep you invested in the game and at least justify that subscription for one more month. But that's going to wrap the video up, and I appreciate you watching this far in. If you have any thoughts, comments, concerns, questions, or complaints, feel free to leave them in the comments. I do read them, may not respond to them all, but I do take the feedback so I can make a better video for you. But until next week, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a good holiday if you're in the States. If you're not in the States, I hope you have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you next Tuesday.